I had to throw a bone to the Martian they left out of the picture, just to start things out. But hopefully some of you, how many of you are holding your breath? Anybody? A little tense, especially the first-time viewers. There's something exciting and engaging about this movie. And I know technically that's not the Martian we should be talking about, but I enjoyed this movie immensely. Hopefully you did too. I enjoyed it, even though some of my Christian brothers and sisters took issue with it. And that happens sometimes when you're a community, when you're a big family. People have objections, people have problems. And so what I don't want to focus too much on is one of the objections I saw going around some review websites. And it's true that Drew Goddard, who contributed significantly to the film in interviews, has called the film a spiritual movie in which the religion being worshipped just happens to be science. Now, quotes are quotes, right? And this could be a man trying to sell it to what he thinks is a spiritual crowd, as much or more than it's somebody who maybe believes science is to be worshipped. I mean, what do you make of somebody's quote? Some people have taken that quote to get incensed that this movie, of course, has no seeming spiritual solution. Well, you know what? When I get a flat tire, I may or may not remember to pray, and I change it, and I keep going. Sometimes, some human ingenuity in practical situations saves the day. So that an ode to tenacity and an ode to science, I don't have any problem with a film that does that. It's very exciting. In fact, some people, of course, even took that one little scene in two different ways. There's that moment where perhaps he's whittling away the need for the cross. Or then again, you can look at it as our resident Martian couldn't have been able to even create fire if the man of faith hadn't left that there. So either that's a little bit of accident or a little divine providence. So you can go all sorts of ways with this. And for the man who actually contributed and worked on the Netflix series Daredevil, which begins with a man talking to his priest and ends with a man telling the story of the Good Samaritan, this is a man who questions and deals with faith in a variety of ways, working it out in his art. And so, let's touch down on the movie's tagline, which is where I'd rather rest. What was it again? I think all the big posters said 3 words: bring him home. Now, the question I want to ask is why? Because probably, I'm guessing most of you, if I ask this question, why do I care? You're like, I cared. Come on, I was on the edge of my seat. And I got choked. I mean, no, I'm not going to ask for show of hands. Everybody got choked up. I just, there was some dust in the air at certain points in the movie. Some of you were, having some trouble. Right, why do we care? This movie obviously pulls on a lot of heartstrings. And if it didn't pull on yours, I don't know, go talk to somebody about that. Right? What notes is it playing? What heartstrings it is pulling? Something is happening here. And we probably find ourselves, if I say, why do you care whether he gets home or not? There's a lot of different responses you could have. Why do we need to bring him home? You could say, it's the right thing to do. You could say, all life is sacred. You could say, we should do everything we can to help our fellow man. Or there's even some great slogans like, leave no man, leave no person behind. The problem is, if it's the right thing to do, we're declaring that there's right and wrong, which is not a scientific application when it comes to morality. All life is sacred? Well, not if I'm secular. All life is precious, maybe? Well, one could argue about that. Probably all of us have known somebody at some point in our lives we kind of wished would go away. We might not be the ones to do anything about that. But there have been people in history, when we look at what they've done, they are less mourned. Right? We should do everything we can to help our fellow man. Some would say that that's actually just the assumption born of religious morals. Nietzsche would even say maybe that needs to be done away with. Leave no man behind, that's not even a universal code, because as we remember, he said he's a pirate, and we know the pirate code. Any man who falls behind is left behind, right? My Pirates movies fans, anybody?
Yeah, but we don't think of those as laws. They're more guiding
More of a guideline, exactly. Look no further than the pirate code. Now, I know, so now some of you, like, if I come out, why do we care if he makes it home? Why do we care if he survives? So, like, how dare you? How dare you? Right, just look. We saved him and it was awesome, right? Well, what would people be saying, or what do you think people would be saying if this movie had ended very differently and they'd missed and the mission was completely unsuccessful? See, success doesn't justify the reasoning that puts us on the journey, because we could fail. Let's imagine all that effort was expended, and some of you who hadn't seen it for the first time, in fact, I'm sure my wife was spoiled, and all day I've been asking her, you sure you don't know anything about, I didn't want to say happy, sad ending, like no idea. Totally uncertain. In real life, we won't know till it's there. So the decision has to be based on the fact that it matters, not necessarily success or not success. I mean, think of all. What would the public be saying if this movie had ended differently? Can you already hear the gripes? All of that money expended that could have gone in other directions. All the accusations, you know what, they were just doing it to CYA anyway. Right? We endangered others for a reckless gambit. We gambled with precious resources and it didn't pay off. See, it's easy to think it was a good idea because this movie is happy-ended. Now, Mark Watney's the character Matt Damon plays, Mark Watney, he actually has a great quote that I just want us to think about. He says, every human being has a basic instinct to help each other out. This is so fundamentally human that it's found in every culture without exception. He says, yes, there are who just don't care, but they're massively outnumbered by the people who do. Think about the words chosen there. That sounds great. When I first hear that, that sounds wonderful. I would kind of like to believe that. And yet, even if I kind of like to believe it, is it sufficient? There's a sufficiency question. What does he call it? Every human being has a basic what? Instinct. So the point of this movie is 3 cheers for instinct. We followed our instincts. Right? Well, are we creatures of instinct? Is that the joy that we have? It's so great that humans happen to have this instinct built in that we help each other out. Are we slaves to those instincts? I mean, some animals procreate without asking permission. Some animals kill their mates. We put people in jail for those things. Right? Instincts, by definition, are not sufficient. We don't celebrate instinct, per se. Instinct isn't good or bad, it just is. So science and evolution, in fact, we would even say, people, proponents of science, secular theory, evolution, they would say some instincts need to be overcome, need to be evolved out of, need to be transcended. And so the movie is getting our emotions all engaged because it's trading on some basic assumptions that we often never even question. They figure you won't question the rah-rah moment because there's something in us that's just like, yes, he made, yes, this is awesome, yes, they're coming together, Chinese, Americans. But what if we did question it? Because if God were just celebrating science and reason, what would these things say? In fact, what does Mark Watney say? He says at some point at the end, he says, everything's going to go south on you, and you're going to say, this is it. And you can either accept that or what? Get to work. That's all it is. You do the math, you solve one problem, you solve the next one, and then the next. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home. Sweet. That sounds like a great life lesson, right? We can all walk home with that energized by the movie. Sounds, yay, science. Yay, you know what? If there's a problem, I just grab those bootstraps, get to work. Again, I'm all for ingenuity and innovation. I love living the time and place and the century in which I do. It's fantastic. But you know what? On a long enough timeline, we all fail to solve a problem. Maybe we don't run out of food, but we run out of teeth. In fact, in one of a movie I used to love back in the 90s, character said, on a long enough timeline, the survival rate of everyone drops to 0. Right? Matt Damon, in this instant, cheats death. In fact, he actually gets saved a lot. We're saving Private Ryan, we're saving him in Courage Under Fire, we saved him in Interstellar, and he was a jerk, right? I mean, he gets saved a lot. Interstellar, he was a little less stellar. But at some point, we don't beat the Reaper. This is a temporary high that flies in the face of everybody else who's actually lost in disasters, right? Or those that simply fall prey to inevitable aging. Here's the math problem we don't solve. 90 plus 1 is 91. 91 plus 1 is 92. 93, I mean, I don't know how long you're going to live. I'm being optimistic about myself. Sooner or later, that math is going to add up to a casket. Or am I getting creamy? I can't remember. But it adds up to death. So at some point, math doesn't solve things. And so we're not just celebrating instinct, and we're not just celebrating math. And so in fact, why are we celebrating bringing him home? Why do people actually bring him home in the movie? Let's ask them. Right? Do they bring him home for public image? Right? One of the characters says, you haven't thought this through. I mean, what are we going to say? Dear America, remember that astronaut we killed and had a really nice funeral for? Turns out he's alive. We left him on Mars. Our bad. Right? Is it about public image then? Wow, we got to save the public image. It's very important that we bring him home. Or just to save, embarrassment. In fact, Jeff Daniels' character even says, every time something goes wrong, the world forgets why we fly. So really, let's bring him home to push our agenda forward for the space program. Am I all for the space program? I actually am. I love some of the ideas and things that we might be able to do. Do I think that people should be conscious of their public image? I don't even think that's a bad thing. But are these the reasons to bring him home? None of those are the reasons that we're feeling as we watch the movie. We want to think it's because we care. None of these answer why do we care, except for about our public image or our publicity or our personal or corporate agenda. Or maybe you could say, I've worked in some different industries, and it takes so long to train an employee, you invest a lot of money, it's like maybe they don't want to lose maybe he's an important enough asset that it's worth the money being spent. Or maybe at least, now there's another factor people love to see in this movie, and it's not incidental to the narrative, right? What happens? Who comes together? Two nations to solve the problem. Unity. Finally, now we have a reason to care. Look at what this universal care does. It not only saves Mark Watney, and we care about that, it brings people together. Unity. Look at the way it brings the world together. But I just ask us to question again, unity about what? Unity about what? Is it just about survival? Is it about proving that the human species can be out there? Let's bring him home. Because let's prove that humanity can go to the stars and humanity can come back. And humanity can survive as we expand. And we can overcome any obstacle. In fact, survival and conquering really they're not synonyms, but they overlap. Let's prove we can beat any environment. Let's put all of our resources together and prove we can bring this man home because it proves something. That's not love or care for Mark Watney. That's, again, proving something. Unity to prove we can survive. Unity to prove our species can conquer. See, none of those give any reason for science or reason to express love or compassion for a fellow man. They might have some form of nobility, but it's just to prove something. One could even look darkly at it and say we're going to use one person to forward an idea or an agenda. In fact, we're going to just use him to bolster our shared ego. In fact, there was a book, The Three-Body Problem, I recently read, written by a Chinese author. It won the Hugo Award for science fiction last year. And in it, the writer, which actually several scientists, including Stephen Hawking and others, have said, maybe we shouldn't be sending out all of these messages to space, inviting extraterrestrials to come and check us out. In fact, really, maybe we should be unifying as a planet to prepare ourselves against what is more likely in almost every statistical situation to be a common enemy. We're unifying just to survive. That's what animals will herd together to do. Unity to conquer, well, if we're all about building empires and crushing those who are different, or just taking land and colonizing, I guess that's something. Or maybe it's just that common enemy. So really it's just about, let's all agree to disagree on things, but band together to fight something else external. See, none of these deal with right or wrong. None of these deal with love or compassion. None of those answer some of those things that we come out with, where it's the right thing to do. Help our fellow man. Love and compassion. None of those are addressed by all of these ideas. In fact, Darwin, in The Descent of Man, would say communities of more sympathetic individuals were more successful in raising healthier offspring to the age of viability and reproduction. So why do we band together into communities? It's just survival. It's just survival. So we start talking about right or wrong, love or compassion, we start running into problems. See, for unity, Mark becomes a symbol of our own supremacy or our own agenda to stroke our own species ego. Man, the creature, can beat anything, perhaps to assure us against those common enemies. That's not a great argument that really, I think, addresses that tug that's going on in here. I think something else is going on in here that none of those things, that all those things fail to fill. I mean, if we're going to get really practical and say we have care and compassion for our fellow man, here's another pitfall where the movie maybe raises a big question mark. In fact, another reviewer on the AV Club said there's a legitimate argument to be had, which the film never even raises, about the ethics of spending what must be billions of dollars to rescue one astronaut when the same money could potentially save many thousands of lives at home. Somebody actually did the math. In fact, somebody did the math of all of Matt Damon's saves. But just for this movie alone, estimated, some incredibly smart people, far more than me, $200 billion. That's estimated cost of what it would have taken for that save. I don't know about you, there's a couple problems at home. Some people who don't have water to drink, who are starving to death. In fact, we don't even need to go outside of other science fiction movies to have an answer. Like Spock would say, you know, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the Mark Watney. It's actually a quote based off on philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who said, "It is the greatest good to the greatest number of people, which is the measure of right and wrong." If that's true, how do we justify $200 billion? See, much of our philosophy and all of our science and reason fail to address why we care. I mean, just look at nature. Oftentimes it's the sick, it's the old, it's the stray. The herd kind of lets be on the outskirts as they mass together. So when the predator comes along, you know, the healthy guys in the center are like, you know, that guy, he's alone and isolated. You know, some of us even will put quasi-religious or spiritual sayings to it, right? It's just the circle of life, people. We're all made of the same star stuff. We come from supernova and nebulae, and we eat from the land and animals, and then we return to it, and whether we're human or dust or the fertilizer for plants, whatever, it's a circle of life. We're all part of the same thing, so does it really matter that Mark Watney goes from living human to part of Mars? Maybe the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Why mourn him? It's the circle of life. Why expend billions of dollars that could feed and educate growing children when he's just becoming something other? Part of the landscape. He's the first man to actually breathe his last on Mars, another first. See, we could actually come up with pithy, you can imagine the eulogy if things had gone differently. Not even all religions give us great answers either. Where science fails, other religion can't either. Because you know what? Some would look at Mark Watney, and some religions would posit, you know, maybe he abandoned someone in a former life. Maybe this is karma that Mark Watney is working off. And so maybe one shouldn't interrupt his karmic cycle because he must pay for this so that then he transcends in the next life. See, all religions are not the same. Some give very different philosophies and reasons, or contradictory reasons, in regard to the need for compassion. And we find ourselves right back at that same quote. Basic instinct to help each other out. There's something in us. Is that true? Is it just an instinct, or is it something more? Either it's a cheat. All these, to me, seem insufficient to explain the inherent heartstring pull that this movie manages to get in most of us. Right? Some people maybe who don't care. There might be something in us, in my mind, that transcends all of these things. Drew Goddard also wrote Daredevil. I mentioned he wrote some episodes of Daredevil, and that series began with a man talking to his priest and then ended with the character Wilson Fisk talking about the Good Samaritan. And I think it's important to visit that as we look at this. The lawyer asked Jesus Christ in the Bible, "What shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus replied, "You shall love your Lord." Asked him. He actually asked the man, "What's written in the law?" The man answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "You've answered correctly. Do this and you'll live." But the man, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "Who's my neighbor?" Jesus replies to this story. I think it's not entirely on the screen, but that's all right. He said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead." Let's be fair, Watney wasn't stripped and beaten, but he was left half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So, likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion, went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal, took him to an inn to take care of him. And the next day he took out money, gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I'll repay you when I come back." Which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? The man said to Jesus, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said, "You go and do likewise." You go and do likewise. Someone comes along, expends money that they didn't need to mend and save someone who was left half dead. Mark Watney doesn't save himself. He can't. He manages to survive an incredibly long time, but he is limited and finite. And we look at the reasons. We have a philosophy that would say the needs of the many should maybe have this money be spent elsewhere. We have some saying, well, there's PR reasons and rah-rah humanity reasons, so maybe we should do this. But they seem not necessarily about Mark Watney. I would say what we feel is the idea that every human, we have a felt duty toward love, compassion, and mercy. However, as we just read in the Good Samaritan story, and as maybe some people deal with and wrestle with in this film, we can suppress that. Let's contrast Mark Watney's quote again. Remember, he says, most people have this fundamental thing, but then there's a few who are, well, we'll say jerks. There's a few who are jerks, but they're massively outnumbered. I would love to believe that. I would love to have Mark Watney's optimism. Because when I contrast his quote with, I don't know, current politics, what's happening in South Africa, what is so fundamentally human that I see? Most of us are reaching across the aisle, right? Oh. When someone's in trouble, everybody watches. They don't just pull out their phone and take video to post on YouTube. Massively outnumbered? I wish. But the person who jumps in is actually unique. They actually make the news. Found in every culture without exception? I would say yes. A sense of right and wrong, a sense of mercy and compassion, and a strong desire and will to suppress it. Now, I think we've all had that at some point. But when I look at the words of Jesus, he says, if a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go in search of the one that went astray? And if he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. That begins to give me a heart for someone that it makes me understand a heart for Mark Watney. In the Psalms, the psalmist has a very different view of humans than just survival instincts, conquering instincts, and unity against bigger predators or harsh environments. The psalmist David would look and talk to God and say, "You formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. My soul knows it well. My frame wasn't hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance, and in your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." One worldview has a life giver, which also means a life purpose, which also means an objective thing to emulate. Genesis says about man, God says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Maybe Mars 2. "And subdue it and have dominion." See, I have a category for understanding that humans are in a special and unique place amongst the creation. And then we can look at the creation and we can see things like instinct and biological responses to stimuli and even the need for herd mentalities for protection. And I think this tug in my heart means I am something more. That I have a special position in creation and that I relate to a God, and even a God who is not the creation. Again, see, not all religions are the same. And I know we'd like to think, I know that a few people will make an argument. They usually use one story about Galileo and a couple wacky creationists nowadays, and they say Christians are against science. Drew Goddard's showed us a great movie where science pushes together and moves forward a lot of amazing things. And guess what? Where has science really flourished? See, innovation and science have flourished in spaces where man does not need to fear the creation. Many superstitions and worldviews would say, don't carve up that cross because this talisman, that might bring you bad luck. Some would say, you cannot tear apart this tree or take apart this piece of the creation and study it because the spirit in the river or God is the creation. You might disturb, upset. The fact that there's a category where there is a God transcendent from his creation who's put us in a special place where we can then dissect, study, and flourish in using it for all of the intricacies with which it can be understood. That's where science truly is driven forward. I would be unfair to not mention monotheistic cultures in general have pushed these things forward. A transcendent God. I cannot say that during the Middle Ages, Islam had amazing scientific technologies move forward as well. When God is not in the created things or in those graven images, we are free to be Mark Watneys with all of the created things that he has given us. Whether we're making explosives or makeshift Iron Man suits, we can use everything that he's given us. The closer to Christian thought, the freedom for science is given, but also, more than that, the right motivation. See, science is a vehicle for success, but it is not the motivation for why we ought to be pushing forward. Maybe for some people, maybe for some of you, it's enough to just climb it. Like when we look at that mountain, why do you climb it? Because we can. I think part of what we feel when we look at rescuing Mark Watney, or when we think about pioneering new territory, I think some of us think because it really matters. It's not just because we can. It's not just proving that we can overcome. And nature is insufficient motivation. Unity is more than a herd mentality. If unity is just, we need to, as another created creature species, unify to stand up to the rigors from external enemies or environment, then all the other meanings we might ascribe to it are just delusions of grandeur for overinflated ego of animals. When I think about this movie in my life, I find those things insufficient. There's only one place I found sufficiency. One is the idea that we were fearfully and wonderfully made. And that our attributes, more than instinct, reflect the heart of a loving and sacrificial God. That we have a heart for care and compassion that reflects an objective beauty. I love when he calls out in the film that there is something beautiful. I believe that is an objective statement, that the world is art, it is not just accident. And that our desire for dominion, although we distort it a lot of times, does have a rightful place and a righteous place. That we are not about survival of the fittest, but about being stewards of a creator. It explains the extreme lack. It explains the dichotomy then of why there are those who act otherwise. Because it also deals with the fact that we have a broken world and there are sinners who suppress that. I believe the same God who made us sent his Son to pave the way. He said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." You see Mark's friends willing to spend not just extra time, but the very real possibility that they could lay down their lives and not succeed. The story of the gospel, the story of the good news of Jesus Christ, is that we all find ourselves on a kind of Mars. And although I think when he makes that statement, many of us, we've never been alone on a planet, but we have felt that way at some point. And unfortunately, our vehicle to return home is broken. And to be honest, it was broken by our own nature and choices. And at some point, it's true that we will all run out of breath. We're broken from any kind of sustaining relationship, and the clock is ticking. This is, for me, Saul. Somebody could do the math. 42 times 365. Right, we have access to amazing ingenuity and resourcefulness, but it is insufficient. And in the end, we're still effectively helpless. The story I love is that God sent a rescue mission to redeem not only my broken equipment, but also to save me, and invited me to participate in ways with that process, though I am insufficient to the task. But he sent someone, his Son, who literally laid down his life for me. Didn't just come and grab my hand, but laid down that life in exchange for mine and those who believe. And in him, someday when our oxygen runs out, we get to go home. Until then, we're called to emulate him, to sacrifice for others in a variety of ways, like we see the earnest characters willing to do here. If we don't believe the rescue's coming, and we don't believe the heart of the rescuer, then we will not be where we need to be positionally when that moment comes. God says, believe in me, believe in my Son, believe what he's done, believe he's coming, be vigilant, and be prepared. That's the undercurrent that I see to this narrative of Mark Watney, something we feel is not just survival and not just winning a fight, but it's rescue and restoration. It touches a chord I think we know is truly divine. So I want you to pray with me. God, I thank you for a chance to reflect on you. I thank you for the wondrous aspects of this film and things that were even explored with scientists, the amazing minds that you have given us, the amazing technologies that we do have, the amazing resources that sometimes we do too often squander or take for granted. And so we thank you for those. We thank you for the celebration of life that this movie is. But I pray it would drive us forward to understand why we value life and ask the deep questions of why we care, what that basis and foundation is, and is it truly touching something that is transcendent or mundane. So God, I thank you for tonight. I thank you for the wonder of story and film. I pray you'll continue to allow us to sift not just this story, but others for your glory. In your name, amen.